Call the April 10th meeting of the Traffic Review Advisory Board meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome. The Traffic Review Board reviews items of interest regarding parking and traffic items. We are an advisory board, and our favorable recommendation today will go before the Oshkosh Common Council. The council can accept or reject any recommendation from this board. If you don't agree with our decision, you can discuss the item with any council member. If the board does recommend an item, a common council member may sponsor a new ordinance regarding this item. I'm sorry, if the board does not recommend an item. All items require 2 readings before the common council. The first reading will take place on Tuesday, April 24th at 6 p.m., and you will be allowed to comment on the item at that time, though the council will take no action. On Tuesday, May 8th at 6 p.m., the item will be on a second reading, at which time the council will take action. You will again be allowed to speak at that time. For this afternoon's meeting, I will read each agenda item, at which time if you'd like to speak, please step to the podium and give your name and address. I do ask that you keep your comments pertinent to the agenda item. The item will then come back to this board for discussion and action. Please call the roll.
Szynski.
Here.
Staple. Absent. Von Schneider.
Here.
Becker.
Here.
Christensen.
Here.
Oz.
Here.
Krause.
Here.
The first item on this afternoon's agenda is approval of prior minutes. Anyone with any questions, comments, concerns, additions, or deletions to those minutes? Seeing none, call the roll on approval of minutes.
Szynski.
Aye.
Von Schneider.
Aye.
Becker.
Aye.
Christensen.
Aye.
Oz.
Aye.
Krause.
Aye.
Which brings us to public comment. This board has adopted a public participation policy which provides 15 minutes for general public comment on a first-come, first-served basis. Citizens must provide their name and address and may speak on matters related to traffic issues within the authority of this board. Statements should be addressed to the board members and not to city staff or other persons. Items that are on the agenda should be addressed at the time the item is read and not during this period for public comments. Statements are limited to 3 minutes, and citizens may only provide comment one time unless special permission is granted by this board. Is there anyone wishing to avail themselves of the opportunity? Seeing none, we move. Oh, please step to the podium. Thank you.
I'm Martine Berry from 307 Smith Avenue, and I wanted to address the bike lane proposal for Smith Avenue.
That's actually on this afternoon's agenda, ma'am. I'm going to ask you to actually come.
What time is that?
It'll be 10 minutes, maybe.
Oh, okay, so you're talking right
Yep.
now. Okay,
It'll be in a
thank
couple
you.
minutes. Which then brings us to new business. First item being a request for a right turn lane on northbound West Haven Drive at 9th Ave.
Okay, and this is what request that Mr. Becker had from the last meeting. So here, right here, the request is to make this lane a right turn only, and then this one would be the left through lane. And the reason for the request is if you look at the other side of the intersection, it's only one lane, and then it's not on this photo, but the bike lane starts right about here. So you actually can't go straight in that right lane. So it does seem to make sense to make that a right turn only, and then the other one be a through left, since it's striped for 2 lanes there, just to get the traffic flow correct.
That's been an issue for a long time, even before the bike lane came in. I actually travel that intersection quite frequently. In my travels to the DMV, it's the most direct route to get there from my office. But many's a time where someone was in that right lane and tried to make it a through lane, and wound up with a bit of a pinch. Yeah, so hence the request. Anyone have a second on the item?
Second.
Questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, call the roll on agenda 1.
Szynski.
Aye.
Von Schneider.
Aye.
Becker.
Abstain?
Christensen,
Aye.
Haas,
Aye.
Rousey,
Aye.
Barry.
Which brings us to agenda item 2, create bike lanes and remove some parking on Smith Ave and Main Street.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am? Oh, yep, actually.
Yeah, I'll just explain the
Yep.
item and then she can speak. But as the board remembers, we started discussing this at the last meeting, or at least we, during staff statements, discussed this proposal. Since then, so just the background on it is the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee has been discussing their bike route planning for this year. And they identified these 2 routes, which would be Smith Avenue from Vinland to North Main Street and North Main Street from Murdoch to Snell as priority routes. They had a public meeting on March 22nd, and a couple residents voiced concerns at that time about losing on-street parking in front of their homes. So the proposed bike route on Smith Avenue would involve removing parking on the north side of Smith Avenue from Jackson to North Main Street. As you recall, in order to put the bike lanes in, the road wasn't wide enough to allow parking on both sides, so it'd have to be removed on one side. And then the proposed route on North Main Street would involve removing parking on the west side from Murdoch to Libby Avenue. And then there's some maps in your packet showing proposed routes and parking conditions. And then the last map shows how they would connect with the city's current network. I'll try to bring some of them up on the screen here, but there's quite a bit of information there that we went over last time, so I won't reiterate everything, but if you want to see any of those maps in particular, I can try to bring them up. So that's the item on the table.
All yours? Again, name and address for the record.
Ardeen Berry on 307 West Smith Avenue. I did some homework after the last meeting, and I have signatures from everyone but one person on Smith, on my block, which is 3 blocks long, actually. And they are all against it, except I have to admit there was one that said she could care less one way or the other. But all the rest of them, I talked to some parents of students at North High, and I was told that part of the reason is for the kids to ride their bikes to school. Unfortunately, I would love to see kids be more active, but they do not ride their bikes to school. They either carpool, drive, their parents take them, or they take the bus. The bike racks are empty and the car lots are full. The parking is an issue. Many of us, it's older homes, only have room in a driveway for 1 car, which means if you have 2 cars, when you back out one, it's going to be on the street, which also means even more congestion with trying to, if you have company, which I do frequently. I have out-of-town college kids, and I have family from out of town. They come often, and parking is an issue already without losing one side. I would love to say that the kids are going to ride their bikes if we put bike lanes in, or that other people, but I talked to 3, and one of them is on our street, that ride their bikes almost everywhere, and these are adults. And they said they do not ride the existing bike lanes because they do not feel safe on them. So they said they're too close to live traffic. And I've noticed that one's, in fact, coming today, I saw 2 bicyclists on Main Street where there are 2 bike lanes and they're riding on the sidewalk. And I know that the adult ones told me they would never ride on those Main Street ones because of the parking on one side and then the lane and then live traffic. And so I do have an issue with it. I would love to see our kids all ride their bikes to school or walk, which would be ideal. But putting in a bike lane is not going to accomplish that. And so the ones that we already have are not utilized at all. Or rarely, I should say. I shouldn't say at all. So that's my issue.
Thank you. Has school district administration thrown their 2 cents in on this?
No, they're notified, but I don't think they have a strong opinion on it. just from past history, when we work with the schools, they generally support bikes as a mode of transportation, but they generally don't have a strong opinion.
All I've seen. I barely travel that area quite a bit, and bikes aren't around. It's the buses, it's the walkers, it's the car.
Yeah, that's the goal of the bike and pedestrian plan
It's a
is,
great idea.
is to helping, once, and that's one of the goals of the plan is once you build the routes is that, you know, eventually people will start using them as you get a better connected network and people can use, start understanding. You know, bike lanes are relatively new to Oshkosh as well, so not a lot of people understand them yet and how to use them. So the goal of the Bike and Pedestrian Committee and then the goal of that plan is to get the bike infrastructure in so that we'll encourage people and they will start biking more and have a more active lifestyle. I don't know if Alexa's our, the city staff representative to the Bike and Pedestrian Committee, so you could maybe speak from their perspective.
I think if we did want to find a compromise, we could end the bike lanes at Jackson, and then it could be shared from Jackson to North Main Street, because that section before Jackson would require no parking to be removed, and it would also be in front of the school. But
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking
Before
too,
you,
so.
before you go, Dan, can you restate that for me, Alexis, just so I understand?
so from Vinland to Jackson, I'm pretty sure it is, no parking would need to be removed to fit 2 bike lanes. It's not
Okay.
until east of Jackson where we have to remove the parking.
Okay. All right, Dan, sorry.
Yeah, I'm in that area quite a bit because one of my friends lives a block off of Smith. And it doesn't seem it's like that heavily of motor vehicle traffic that a share would seem to be sufficient.
Is there any other routes that people have seen bikes on? Because kids are gonna ride the bikes like they walk. They're gonna take a shortcut, the shortest path from point A to point B.
I think, and again, you can jump in if you want, but I think the bike and pedestrian plan that was put together, the intention of the route going down Smith Street was to connect basically from the school to all the way to North Main Street, which would then connect up north to potentially to the county park and to the North Main Street bike lane. So it's kind of, the intention is to provide an east-west connection on the north side of town that would then connect into other bike paths. Is I think probably the best way to state that. And I wasn't here in 2000, so I wasn't part when they put this plan together, but from looking at the plan, they were trying to make, you know, connections north, south, east, west to major origins and destinations the best they could.
And I gave you guys the handout that was written by one of the students at Oshkosh North. He couldn't make it because he had baseball practice, but he asked me to bring it here today.
I don't dispute that that's probably the best location for, as you put it, Jim, an east-west connection, but I still don't believe it's the best, an optimal connection, given the fact the school's actually there, and I realize that sounds just the tiniest bit hypocritical, because that's what we're trying to accomplish, but as I expressed at the last meeting, parking is a premium in that location, particularly during events, track and field gatherings, baseball games. I'm a little hesitant to move forward with the fact that we're going to lose essentially quite a bit of parking in that area, or at least obstruct it, and provide an unintended potential consequence by putting a bike lane there to increase their safety supposedly, but again, I would argue potentially to further jeopardize it with parked cars on the side of the road. If there is in fact someone in that bike lane and a car door pops on the traffic side, you're going to have bikers getting doored, in my opinion, during events.
I don't believe that we were removing any parking in front of the high school.
Well, but if you're going to put a bike lane there, you're going to force those people in the bike lane to ride right up alongside the cars with the expectation that they've got free reign, when in fact they don't. God forbid there's a parked car and somebody in that traffic lane and a door pops, is all I'm suggesting. They got nowhere to go.
Well, yeah.
I mean, you have that potential at any
You do, but,
bike lanes we have, unless,
well, and that's always been one of my
You
contentions
got
with
that on
bike
Main
lanes.
Street too, with the bump outs and so on and so forth, all the way north.
And I hate to sound like a broken record, but I've said that on numerous occasions. Bike lanes have their place, and I'm not bashing bike lanes, but we need to understand what the consequences are too, and make sure people use them appropriately. In fact, just this morning, I was in the university area, you can probably figure out where, and saw someone riding in a bike lane against the flow of traffic.
Yeah, I saw that yesterday on High.
Well, there you go, that's where I was. But just to make the point that they don't have always the intended consequence, they sometimes have an unintended consequence, which makes them less safe.
Well, I think the point of the bike lane is to put the bicyclist in a predictable location, so eventually drivers will know to expect a potential conflict there.
And I don't disagree with any of that, and that's exactly how they should be used, but my point is they're not being used.
I think
that
you
way
could
by
say the same
everybody.
about drivers. I see people running stop signs all the time, so we should hold bikers and vehicle drivers to the same standard.
There's the man to talk to right there in the gold badge. I mean, I've advocated that for a long time. But unfortunately, it's not the case, and unless we can solve that problem.
yeah, I think there's, nobody's here from the Bike and Pedestrian Committee, but obviously that's what they're trying to implement, the Bike and Pedestrian Plan. And I think there's some, well, obviously, no matter where we put the bike lanes, like I said, in front of the high school, there won't be parking removed, so it wouldn't be a loss of parking. There's always going to be the potential conflict between the bike and the motorist, whether they're riding on the street or they're riding on a bike lane or or on a sidewalk for that matter, with vehicles pulling in and out of driveways, et cetera. So there's always, that argument's always going to be there. And some cities have put the bike lanes on the inside of the parked cars and had, protected lanes. That's something too that, we don't really have the real estate to do that, and we haven't done that based on the plan that was put together before. However, I think that this is going to continue to be an issue, so it's something that the city, and that's ultimately going to be up to council if they want to continue with, the bike and pedestrian plan, because it sounds like there's going to be, the continuing debate between the traffic board and the bike and pedestrian committee on what's the best outcome for the city. And I guess I would recommend, I don't know, Alex, is anybody from the traffic review board on the bike and ped update committee? Maybe we could get somebody on there so they could provide their input, that way as well. Because I see this being a potential, issue going forward. Every time we have a bike lane, traffic review, and I respect everybody's opinion. I'm not an advocate one way or another. Has one opinion, and the bike and pedestrian committee has another opinion, and then ultimately council has to decide. But council adopted that plan, and they're ultimately going to be reviewing and adopting possibly another plan. So I think that, that's kind of a philosophical debate that's going to go on, but in this case, we have to, or the board has to make a recommendation on these two routes, and you can do that. I assume you want to do that separately, each of the routes, and see what you want to recommend, but that's just kind of my thoughts on it.
I just had a couple of comments. On the Smith, they're relatively short blocks. The one in the middle, 2-house block. One of the houses is off on Comet where their parking lot is. And, every single driveway all the way along can at least fit some side by side. Others have long driveways that can fit multiple cars. I understand losing parking is bad, but it seems like everybody would have a plan to park relatively close.
Yeah, or on the other side of the street too.
How often are cars parked? Is it a pretty heavily parked area on a daily basis? Has there been any studies?
I don't know,
like
I
that?
didn't go out and watch the cars, but
Yeah,
In this
no,
picture, nobody's parked out there.
yeah, I drove down there once, but probably the resident would know more, I don't know.
park there regularly because most of them do have short driveways, as I say. So when they pull out and one goes to work, the other one parks in the street.
But they still can't park overnight, right?
No.
And then we
Not
checked
without
on the
permit,
parking
right.
permits. There were no parking permits pulled, right?
No.
Right. Yeah, we did check with, the police department did check on parking permits, and that wasn't an issue for overnight parking permits.
To me, it looks like for the size of the homes in the area, the driveways are pretty big, and most of them are longer or wider. And the ones in the between Comet and Geneva, they're double wide, or they're not even on that block for front of their house. So that would be 10 spots right there out of the 35.
And the homes do have garages for most part, don't they?
No,
Do not.
about half of them do not.
Okay.
How about we separate out and go with Main Street first, if there's no objections? Is anybody okay with that? Move to approve the Main Street bike lanes?
From Main to...
Separate it out
Okay,
for the time being, then we're, because there's no objections to Main Street.
Main to Jackson?
No, there's a bike lane on Main,
Oh, right, northbound. Is that
so
been
we'll
shot?
separate Smith from Mason,
Okay,
and I move to approve Main.
northbound.
Well, the bike lanes as are
Right.
stated
Yeah.
in.
Just wanna make-
Burdock to Snell on Main Street.
Need a second if that's what we're gonna do.
I'll second that.
Believe we need to call a vote on the separation of the question.
This is just to separate it and then to.
Right,
and we
yep,
need to
because we're
vote
gonna
again.
consider it as
Okay.
two separate items.
Okay.
Then, the way I understood you said it, that's why I
yeah,
asked you to
yeah.
do it twice.
We're voting to separate Main Street from,
Anyone have any comments or questions of Dan on that front? Otherwise, I'm gonna call the roll on separating the question as he laid out. Seeing none, call the roll on separating the question.
Szynski,
aye.
Wanschneider,
Aye.
Becker,
Aye.
Christensen,
Aye.
Haas,
Aye.
Rousey,
Aye.
carried.
Okay, so now we've got two separate issues before us. The Smith Avenue scenarios and then the Main Street scenarios. To Dan's suggestion, let's move forward first then with the Main Street issues.
Yeah. Well,
You want-
it'd be one thing, and we start getting the concept of up to the park, up all the way north, by approving that.
And there hasn't been any residential objections or?
And that would be, yeah, I mean, it goes right through the industrial area. Plenty of room.
Yeah, I used to work at Bemis out there, and there'd be a number of people that actually would bike out there.
Nice direct bike route up to the park.
Anyone else with a comment, question, or concern? All right, then call the roll on the question as it relates to the Main Street portion.
Szynski,
Aye.
Rousey,
Aye.
Wanschneider,
Aye.
Becker,
Aye.
Christensen, Haas.
Aye.
Which then leaves us with the issues as it relates to Smith Ave. Anyone? Is that just a sigh, Ross, or are you gonna say
No.
something?
I was thinking about going with a Sharrow for east of Jackson. And have the bike lane west side.
That would actually be an amendment, if anyone wants to.
Say that again?
Okay, yeah,
Um,
that's good.
Go with a Sharrow for the east side of Jackson on Smith, and then on Smith west of Jackson have the bike lane.
Width-wise, is there any difference between one side of, or the other? Have Sharrow on one side?
The
and
Sharrow
bike-
wouldn't impact the parking, so we could keep the parking and just add the Sharrow.
What's your
Yeah.
opinion on that? Or is that?
I mean, I know that I've heard the Bike and Ped members, they don't think that Sharrows are as effective or as safe. But if it is a lower traffic street and we have a whole list of residents who are against parking removal, I think it would be a reasonable compromise, because then we could at least get bike lanes in front of the school.
So I think, just for clarity, I think what Dan is saying, that it would be a bike lane on Smith from Vinland to Jackson, and then it would be Sharrows, which obviously, we wouldn't do a Sharrow one direction, so it'd be Sharrows in both direction from Jackson to North Main.
Jackson to what?
North Main.
Oh, yeah.
And how many parking spots would be removed? on this?
35.
Well, there wouldn't, I mean,
Which-
It wouldn't
With
be
the
removed
Sharrows?
if they do it.
With the parking
In
removal,
this whole,
35 if we did the bike lanes, and
but
then
under this,
with Sharrows, no removal of parking.
Yeah, you don't have any residences in this stretch, you know, it's all school.
If the Sharrow would encourage biking, and you could always
I
change
th-
it.
Yeah, I think when I see a Sharrow, that just makes you more aware that there might be bikes in the vicinity. It's like if you see like a pedestrian crossing sign or something, you know.
if people know what that means even.
Well, it's got the picture of a bike, they should be able to figure it out.
Yeah, well, if the paint's good enough to show it, yeah.
Anyone else?
So, yeah, so I'd like to move that, put the Sharrow on the east side of Jackson and bike lane on the west side.
I believe we need a second. I don't recall one.
I'll
second that.
Okay.
Sharrow right in front of the school then, too?
No.
Nope, that would
bike
actually be
lane,
bike lanes under the way it
Oh,
was
that-
laid that out.
Okay, that's what I was,
But there's no parking removal.
no, I,
Going once, going twice. Call the roll.
Szynski,
Aye.
Schneider,
I,
Becker,
No.
Christensen,
Aye.
Haas,
Aye.
Rousey,
No.
Carrie.
So, that concludes number 2, which brings us to staff statements.
Okay, the first thing is Jackson Street. I know a couple board members are interested in that and asked last meeting about that. So we're going to do a speed study on Jackson Street. So we'll put the tubes out there and see what the speeds are. And then we'll also, internally, we're going to hopefully have a staff meeting with the DOT just to kind of get their thoughts on the area. So laying some of the back work to see what the potential is for that area.
Bill?
I passed around a photo. I live 6 houses from the corner of, New York and Jackson. And living that close, we normally hear the accident. We usually hear the squealing of tires and the crunch, and then at about 5 minutes, then we hear the sirens. This particular accident was on the 30th of March, and a car not this one, a different car ran the stoplight, hit this one in the side. Now, this is a full-size Buick, and if you look at the close-up, you notice that the back door is open. That's because I would assume the frame was probably sprung, so it was hit pretty hard. And the car that hit it, the whole front clip was gone, and they ended up with shovels, and they had 3 big plastic bags full of debris from that. And then there was a third car also that was involved. The Buick, the driver of the Buick was taken away in an ambulance. I have no idea what the extent of his injuries were, but he was taken away to the hospital. I just have a question. I know this is not a surprise to anyone that these accidents happen on Jackson, and speed and driver neglect and running lights is a problem. Is there any way that let's say the delay can be adjusted? Because somebody's coming, okay, the light it's turning yellow, or they see the numbers counting down because there's a pedestrian crossing there, so they speed up. They get close, and it's like, okay, I'm going too fast to stop, so I'm going to keep going. And I think that's what happens. Can that light be delayed? I mean, so you'd have a
Longer yellow.
You
Delay
mean a longer yellow, longer amber light?
Well, now the green doesn't start till.
So the green going the other way, there's a lapse between when it goes yellow and red until the other direction turns green. If there would be more of a lapse
So you
from,
hold up the cross traffic a beat or two.
right, if it would be maybe I don't know is there a set amount of time, like 3 seconds, 2 seconds? It doesn't seem to be very long.
Yeah, there is. Well, you're talking about the Jackson Street corridor, which the lights are coordinated so that so that you can get through a couple of the greens.
Yeah.
And that's been brought up before. The traffic
Right.
engineering theory is you want the lights coordinated, because otherwise you have basically the effect of what you're talking about is people don't think they're going to make the next light, so then they speed up. And they potentially, have vehicle conflicts that way. So that, I don't know that that's the solution. There's no doubt that Jackson in New York has a high crash rate. That intersection does. I'm not sure exactly what the answer is. I've investigated a little bit with left turn lanes. However, it doesn't necessarily, well, if we did that, with the current road layout, what you'd have to do is create a trap lane, which is a left turn lane that basically, so the through lane would end and become a left turn lane, and then traffic would have to get over to go straight or right. And there's not currently a high volume of left turners. However, the left turners, there is a high crash rate from left turners that can't see the curb lane. So level of service wise, it would decrease the level of service on Jackson Street, and there isn't enough left turners to warrant creating the trap lane. However, there is this crash issue. So I think what we're going to have to do, and we'll start by talking with WISDOT, but this is just me thinking out loud. I think maybe what we'll have to do is a corridor study and see what the potentials are out there based on what could possibly be done. I know there's the left turn lane is an idea, but I'm not sure exactly how that would function and if it meets the warrants. It's preliminary, I would say it doesn't, but that's an option. And then there are, there's a number of other issues there. I know the residents are concerned about speeding. From my perspective, from what I've seen, it isn't a speeding issue as much as it's an intersection issue. But again, I think we need somebody to probably do a corridor study, and I know that Alexa is one of the neighborhood representatives, and I know that's something that the neighborhood has expressed some interest in as well. So the first step would be, we'll do the speed study, but I know we've done them in the past, and we haven't shown a huge speeding issue. And then we'll also talk with WISDOT and see what the options are there.
Jim? When you're talking left turn, are you northbound or southbound where you say it's not an issue?
I'm saying that I'm not saying it's not an issue. I'm
Well,
saying to create a left turn lane doesn't currently meet the warrants to do so.
What, is this northbound or you're southbound or both?
Both. Because you'd have to, you wouldn't create one
Without
way,
the
not
other.
the other.
Yeah.
Well, down by Lourdes, when I asked that question, it was because of Lourdes School on that corner, you had a left turn lane going from south to east, but it didn't warrant it going north to west. No, you got the same thing at Jackson. And there should be double arrows. And
Yeah, I mean,
you
they're
still
two
got
different.
Merrill at the, so you got same scenario, Jim.
And it's different because over there we were coming from, we're talking about on Jackson Street, which is the arterial going to the minor streets, and over by Lourdes, it's the opposite. We were
Yeah.
talking about the minor
But you
streets
got the
coming.
school and the left turn problem. And clearing the intersection,
I'd think,
safer with the green arrows. And then anti-amber.
right, they're two different situations because you're talking about the minor street going to the major street, and Jackson's the
Oh.
opposite of that.
Jackson's got heavy traffic in both
Yeah,
directions,
I
whereas
mean, it's
Sawyer
close,
after
Ross, I'll
Wetzel
concede
isn't.
that, and yeah, he's right. I would concede it's close, but it's not identical
Oh,
because
no.
we're talking about a middle school versus a high school, and we all know the difference there from a volume perspective, just by sheer student count, and drivers versus
Well, you got more
non-drivers.
cars because you got kids that don't drive though, compare one to the other.
Okay, but
got-
you've also got quality issues there too. You've got 30 and 40 somethings driving as compared to 16, 17, and 18-year-olds.
True.
So, I mean, there is a difference. I don't disagree with you. There's definitely a problem that needs to be addressed here. And I'd actually suggest we do take a look at
Yeah,
left turn
any
onlys.
kind of delays without running it.
Because it's going to potentially, and again, we've done things that didn't meet warrants in the past. I mean, you bring up that example. You know, just because something doesn't meet the warrants doesn't mean it's not unwarranted, not to be confusing. But if,
So, I mean, and we'll talk with, because it being a state highway, we have to get WISDOT input
Absolutely.
as well, but I get, I'm not opposed to doing something there. We'll see what the options are at that intersection, but the last meeting, we were talking about the whole corridor. So if we're just talking about that intersection, there is a safety issue there that if we can come to some solution, that would be great. But if we're talking about the whole corridor, that's a whole different scenario
When
than,
we're talking, New York and Jackson.
well, here we are. Again, I don't mean to muddy the waters. I don't disagree the whole corridor is an issue, but I think that comes down to, I hate to keep beating the same drum, but I think that comes down to an enforcement issue and a eyes on, see something, say something. So be prepared for the calls at the non-emergency number at OPD. But I would encourage people to make that phone call when they see people, because that's the only way that's going to change, is if we have motorists having conversations with our friends in blue. I mean,
so that's fine. So if I'm hearing the board correctly, then I'll focus on that intersection in particular. And I think that's a separate related issue to the corridor, but if that's what we're the most, in my opinion, that is the most concerning area there. So we can start with that and see where that goes.
Just a couple things too. As you can see in the one photo, the school crossing is right. That is the school crossing. And you notice that the car also, when it was hit, had there been a pedestrian on the sidewalk, they probably would have been run over, because this was a pretty high-speed event, and it probably would not have, probably someone on the sidewalk would not have had been able to get out of the way. And we have an elderly neighbor that walks her dog about 3-4 times a day down that part of the sidewalk, and I know she couldn't get out of the way. Another thing is the tubes for speed. I see them out and they must be set for some average wheelbase or something, so if somebody drives their Honda Spirit that has a 7-foot wheelbase and somebody else has their Cadillac with a much larger wheelbase, that kind of averages out, is that how that works?
Yep.
Then, how about placement? You know, if you place it near, let's say, an intersection, you're probably gonna have a average slower speed than, let's say, if you could locate like halfway between, let's say, New York and Irving, and New York and Murdoch is where the real true speeding is going on. And then just one more thing, and then I'll be quiet
Oh,
here.
you got some
As
points.
far as synchronizing the lights, I know we talked about this before, and I know I can understand that. But if you have all of the lights, it just seems to me that there has to be some, with somebody on a computer or doing something that this could be figured out. Maybe a slower speed limit. It was 25 versus 30. Could the lights be synchronized more in that scenario, given a more of a delay? I don't know. I don't know. I'm just asking.
Yeah.
You're the guy. And
Sure. Yeah, I mean, obviously we can adjust traffic signals to whatever, is the best scenario, which generally it's the theory was to coordinate them. But however, they do go out of coordination once in a while if, in some cases where we have pedestrian buttons, so if a pedestrian pushes the button, that can take them out of coordination. And now with some of the newer technology where we're doing vehicle detection, sometimes that is more important than doing coordination. But obviously, traffic timing can be adjusted. But I guess I don't think necessarily that's the answer there, because I think there's just as strong as argument to have them coordinated as there is, maybe stronger than there is to not have them coordinated.
Well, I think the mindset's got to be to have them coordinated as you go in, because by default they're going to become uncoordinated by the examples you mentioned, plus just people making turns. I mean, you're going to get slowed up behind somebody making a left on one of those side streets, or slowed up behind somebody making a right. So the coordination's always going to be slightly off. There's no way to get it perfect. So you got to shoot for perfect and settle for what you
Doesn't
get.
that get readjusted over time, though? I mean, it corrects itself. It isn't gonna be out of timing.
Only after they get to the next light.
Yeah.
So if they make the light at New York and Jackson, the next main cross street is what with the traffic light?
Oh,
Irving.
Irving to the
So
north?
they're if somebody's in front of them making a left or a right, they're not going to make that light when it's green,
Yeah.
just because they had to slow down for a few seconds
Well, that's
to let
where
somebody
lane
turn.
hopping comes in.
Well, if they can do it. And again, my point is there's so many variables in that mix, you're never going to get it right exactly 100% of the time. So you got to strive to get it the best you can. And I think
Well-
we're pretty close to that at this point, because we're never going to get it.
Well, if the speed limit is 25 and you set the lights for 35 for continuing, then you're encouraging speeding.
No, we set the lights based on what the speed limit is, which is currently 30.
Yeah, well, but I'm saying if it was, you'd have people stop more often that way. And breaking up the flow of traffic has some merit too, instead of going right straight through. We now don't have them stopping at Murdoch because it's a roundabout. So they're picking up speed all the way down to New York, and there's your problem for southbound. That's the way I see it, as far as not having a stop. I go into Milwaukee and I travel on Capitol Drive, and there's a lot of traffic lights, and you stop for every other one or so. It slows the traffic down. It's not a straight shot from one end to the other. I think it's worth thinking about to control what's going on in the entire corridor. That's my talk on it. You gotta interrupt the flow of traffic. And he's doing, it isn't the left turn that's responsible for interrupting it. It's the traffic lights.
Yeah, I would argue though that the safety issue isn't a result of the traffic lights. The safety issue at the intersections currently is a left turn issue.
Oh, it certainly is, yes.
Yeah, so I don't think that.
Especially the hidden left turn type thing. Yeah.
Anything else on Jackson Street at all? Well, in connection with each other. I mean, we're talking about the intersection and the whole corridor. It's the way this turned out to be, which is fine.
Well, I think
Just
the
wanna make sure it's
problem on
flushed
New
out.
York has been escalated, and it's also the result of cars increasing their speed as they go south, for one thing. There's no stopping at Murdoch. And they slingshot out of there, they're not going 15. I see a policeman watching the traffic near a roundabout today. That was wonderful. But 2-3 blocks away from the roundabout or more. You gotta interrupt the flow of traffic.
So are you arguing for essentially decoordinating the traffic light at Jackson?
Well, if
in New
somebody's
York?
speeding, they are gonna be stopped because they're getting there too soon.
What's the downstream
I
ramifications
mean,
of that?
there's
is the
people come
question.
by and then you end up stopping behind them. And they go blowing by you. That has happened a lot.
Well, basically, like I said, what happens if you don't have them coordinated, then you have people trying to make the lights that end up running the lights, and it actually makes it worse. So the traffic engineering theory is that you want to coordinate them if you can.
So you're giving into the speeding public.
Well, that's not necessarily a speeding
just-
issue, that's just an issue,
Issue.
it can be it's traffic flow and safety.
Same scenario where 85% of the people are going such speed, even though it's too fast, you're letting the violators dictate your speed limit.
No, the traffic, speed limit theory is that you set the speed limits at what 85% of the motorists are traveling, because that 85% of the people are gonna drive what's a safe and prudent speed, and that leaves law enforcement to rein into the 15%. If you set a speed limit artificially too low, so say if you're on an arterial major roadway and you set the speed limit at 25 and it's a 4-lane highway and people are comfortable and feel that they can safely drive it at 35, well then you're going to have the majority of people are going to be violating, and it's going to be impossible for law enforcement to rein in. So, really the speed limits need to be set at based on how the road's designed. And the time to address that is you look at, what type of roadway it is, what the capacity it's moving, the level of service that's needs on that roadway, and you design it for that, and the speed is set as a result of the design of the road is really how it goes. It's hard to do it backwards.
Well, don't accident facts kind of help indicate what it should be though, Jim?
Accidents play a
That should be a
factor.
measuring stick.
Sure, but in this case, in Jackson Street, again, for all the data I've seen, is that it's an intersection issue, it's not a speeding issue.
Well, I think maybe you gotta spend more time watching it.
Well, like I said, that's, I don't want to belabor the point, but that's exactly what we're talking about. So I'll be meeting with, we'll be doing the speed study in conjunction with the police department to see, if there is a speeding issue and what it is, number one, and then number two, we'll be collaborating with WSDOT in particular for the intersection of Jackson and New York to see, what potential solutions there could be for that intersection. And, that's open to anything. I'm just telling you what the traffic engineering theory is as far as I know. And
Well, I can appreciate that, yes, It's pretty, unless you stand around and watch and become a part of the situation, whether you're, when we're snow removal or weed pulling or raking leaves, and cars won't slow down and cars won't move over and their mirrors are just about hitting you in the back, it's a problem.
And we can appreciate that. You know, that's more of a quality of life issue, and I know Alexa's well aware of the neighborhood concerns.
Can't wait for, more accidents.
We good? I don't want to give short shrift to anybody. All right, then we're going to move on to South Park and 9th Avenue Corridor Plan in the public input meeting.
Yeah, so the public input meeting for that was last evening. So I don't know if, I think Dan was the only member of this board that was there. I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to share with the board or from the meeting, or,
No, basically, it just came down to what everybody knows is that 9th and South Park are too narrow and there's no right-of-way to be acquired to make them wider,
So, and 9th, the board and council already approved basically, in essence, what I'll call road diet or road reconfiguration from Ryko to Knapp. So we'll be implementing that this spring or summer, which actually was one of the recommendations. Unfortunately, the weather hasn't cooperated with us. I know there's a number of areas that need the street painting updated, and last year at this time, we'd already started, but it's not cooperating so far. It really should be about 60 degrees before we can street paint or close to it, and it just hasn't been. So we will be implementing that. And then I don't know if there's any other relevant discussions.
Most of the stuff was just common sense, I think, I brought up about bringing back the 20th Avenue extension to the master plan. And, I thought that got some favorable output there. But, because like I said, when that was removed, we didn't have the Sawdust District or the arena over there. So it was kind of like having another way to get to South Main. Didn't really make it much sense. It was pretty controversial years ago. Like, for a while, it looked like it was going to go through. And then all of a sudden, it was just taken off the master plan. But I mean, there's a lot of pros and cons of people both for and against it,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
the original master plan was to extend it all the way to Maine.
Yeah.
It cuts off at Oregon now.
Yep, you got to go around. There's quite a bit of green space right there.
Pile of rocks.
Yeah. You have anything to add on that, Jim? Or you?
No, I mean, I think you've seen the plan. So there was just a couple minor modifications that, from the meeting that I'm sure they're gonna put in the plan, and then they'll, I'm assuming, bring them forward to Plan Commission and Council to formally adopt. So they just wanted to have the opportunity for the boards and the public to give input.
There's a draft plan floating around. There's actually one over on the counter.
Yep.
If anybody wants to eyeball it before they leave tonight. I took a look at it before the meeting started tonight over there on the counter. It makes some very valid points. There's also some suggestions in there as to property utilization. I mean, that might be just a little tiny bit outside of our purview, but certainly Planning Commission has got some stake there in terms of how they want to lay out zoning. And those
It's on
type
the
of things.
city website if you want to take a look at it too, or if anybody does. Then I just have two other items
Sure.
that aren't on there currently. So Jim Staple, who was on the Park Utility Commission, was appointed to this board. He had applied, and so he'll be hopefully here for the next meeting. I know he travels a lot, so that was his only concern, is he's going to miss some meetings because of travel, but we hadn't had a lot of interest, and he's been a good board member on that, the Park and Utility, and I think he'll bring, whenever any parking issues come up, he's been on there a long time, so he can bring some perspective if any of those issues as well. So I think he'll be a good addition, and then the board is full at that point. And then the only other thing that Alexa just asked me before the meeting is if you guys are aware, there's the POLCO, which is citizen engagement tool that the city is using. So I believe there's a link to it on our website where you can sign up, but they put out surveys every once in a while. It's a way to get public input. Generally, they're real quick, couple questions, and so far it's been pretty successful. So if you haven't, or anybody that's watching hasn't registered, we encourage everyone to register for that. It's a good way to give input for some items real quickly if you can't make it to meetings, or it's a good way to get. I know they used it for the Lake Shore site. I think was the first time they used it. So that's out there, and then also the C-Click Fix app, which also there's a link to that on the website. I do get 1 or 2 things a week, and it is helpful that we get some information, some stuff that we wouldn't notice, that if a sign's missing or incorrect or something like that. That's a helpful way to send that information in as well. I think that's all I have for now.
Everybody familiar with what Jim's talking about? City manager did a nice presentation on it for State of the City. It basically gives you the opportunity, standing on the sidewalk, not doing it from your car, but standing on the sidewalk with GPS in your phone, to report a specific issue. And the powers that be, depending on what issue it is, gets the specific location. So you don't have to do much of anything to report. I think the example that the city manager used was a pothole, but it gives them the exact location, Public Works, where that pothole is, so they can get to it and get it done rather quickly, as opposed to going the length of a street looking for a pothole. Does anyone have any items for the next agenda?
Yeah, I'd like to bring up a future discussion topic of parking near the arena on the side streets. A lot of people have been complaining on Facebook, and they posted pictures of like cars blocking their driveways, and a number of times they said that they've called the police, and the police don't come out and do anything. I realize that basketball season is over now, but we still have a number of other events coming up, and then just so we're squared away for next season, maybe we could confer with like Councilor Allison Osby, who's the arena manager, and get her input as well.
Yeah, I know we had this discussion before. I mean, I don't know what you're suggesting, because I know that, obviously there's going to be some off-street parking in that area. If people are parked too close to driveways, I know that OPD enforces that as they can. I know that I've seen, they've done some enforcement out there. So other than that, I don't know what you're interested in. Are you interested in removing parking, or?
Well, and also, you're gonna have, whatever the width of the streets are, when it's in winter, that's gonna be narrowed by a couple feet as well, but, like I said, it just seemed, like the people said that, they showed pictures of somebody, completely blocking a driveway, and like, they said, like, sometimes the police have came out, but they said more often than not that they haven't came out, and like, they just give somebody a ticket, whereas instead of like towing somebody's car, if you're blocking a driveway, maybe we could up the penalty for that, if you're blocking someone's driveway, to have the car towed rather than just get a ticket.
Well,
maybe-
that discretion lies with the homeowner, if I'm not correct.
I was
I
gonna
mean,
say,
correct
maybe-
me if I'm
The
wrong.
way you're saying, or in the,
Blocking driveways, like people park
you
blocking.
park in the roadway?
Yeah, you park in the roadway, but you're blocking somebody's,
And it would-
across somebody's
it would
driveway.
default to how much are you blocking? Is it full driveway, is it partial, is it a shared driveway, and there's more room to get around it? So every situation would be a little
Okay.
different.
Well,
Yeah.
but the point I'm trying to make is, once the ticket goes on the glass, it can be towed.
If it's a traffic obstruction.
Yes.
there's nothing
So-
cause to remove.
Right,
If
that's,
it's a
that,
foot over the driveway,
that-
it's not gonna get towed for being barely over the driveway.
well, but the point I'm making, Dan, is the discretion for that, once the ticket hits, is the homeowners. Again, correct me if I'm wrong.
To tow it from a city street,
Yes,
that would be the police department instead.
if it's, so you're saying if it's blocking my driveway and you put a ticket on it, I can't have it towed?
If it's on your personal property, then it's your decision. If it's on the street, it'd be the discretion of the officer.
But by putting the ticket on the glass, is that not then,
Officer
towable.
discretion based on how much is the obstruction.
okay, then the information I've gotten from towing companies is in fact
As
incorrect.
far as I understand, a private citizen can't have a vehicle towed,
Um,
unless it's your vehicle,
I was told that they'll pick it up if there's a ticket on the glass.
from a private property.
From the street if there's a ticket on it.
I'll check that.
Because it's happened to me more than once.
Some
Just putting it out there.
possible solutions included that we discussed would be like having shuttle buses from various locations, and then, you know, when there's a game, you know, like you park at, you know, like the bar or wherever, you know, and then they take you over, and maybe like valet parking or something, or,
Yeah, those are items that really, that would have to be addressed by the arena.
yeah, that's what I was saying, maybe if you could confer with the Counselor Allison Osby as the arena manager now, that,
I would suggest you give her a call with that issue. I don't think that's something that the traffic review board would really take up.
okay. Well, I just thought it might be, you know, something of interest, to help the neighbors in that vicinity.
Yeah, I mean, they'll, other than, they basically, you know, you have two options when you have on-street parking like that. There's, obviously, they can call the police and they can work on enforcement. And the other, you know, if there's this particular area, we wanted to look at removing parking, which I don't think that's warranted necessarily at this time, but if there is some particular area that for some reason we think there shouldn't be that's obviously something I could put on the agenda and we could consider.
Yeah, I mean, it's something to talk about, but again, removing parking from, you know, in a 3-block, 4-block radius of the arena permanently is a little bit of an
Yeah, I wasn't really
overstep.
moving it. I was just saying, because like I said, I mean, I don't live in that neighborhood, but a number of people, you know, posted on Facebook and showed pictures too.
Anyone else with a future agenda item? All right, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Second? All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.